All right, welcome everybody. We're so glad to see so many of our old friends and colleagues here today to hear about reading fluency. Um, I'm Dan Logust. You probably know who I am, but I'm the Director of Professional Development for the System Office for Federal Programs. Lee is also with me, my partner in crime and the
Exactly.
specialist in professional development and distance learning. And actually, I unfortunately have to leave this meeting momentarily because there is another meeting I have to go to, which is the name of the game. But I am here to introduce my old friend and colleague, Amy Van Oostrum-Engler. She's not old, but we've known each other
I'm
for
old.
decades. Um, she, since I've known Amy, she has taught at Wake Tech and Durham Tech in CCR programs for a long time. She started as an ESL instructor, but I think maybe more of her time has been spent in ABE. She can tell you that. She spent a significant amount of time in the ABE side of the house. And she has three children, she calls them. They're actually three young adults that she raised, and a husband. That this is all in her bio. She sent me a bio that I'm not doing a very good job of repeating. But she did. I remember that she lived in Guatemala for a while. She's had a very varied life and a lot of experience, and she is now a PhD student at NC State who is doing a study on reading, teaching adults how to read. So I will let Amy take it away from there.
Thank you. I will reinforce, I actually am old, and that's okay. I am fine with that. And when you're on a campus, often sitting next to 25-year-olds, you feel exceptionally old. Um, but I am psyched to be here today. I just wanted to get us started thinking about reading and what reading means to our students and what reading skills we teach in the classrooms, maybe what you practice if you're a teacher or an instructor, what you practice with your students last semester or this quarter, maybe what you're working on. Now, reading is a lot of different things. Um, this is our presentation, but I really want to get us started because it's going to be very interactive. And I'm hoping at any point you feel comfortable, you can hop off of mute and ask questions and whatnot. But let's go ahead and start with a poll. And so I'm curious, how many people have had STAR training, or any of your teachers have had STAR training? And while you're answering that, I will give you a little bit more of my background. I was an ESL teacher for many years, over 2 decades at Wake Tech. It's hard to say when I switched from ESL to ABE because actually they changed my class. So I didn't change what I was teaching or who I was teaching. I just got changed in terms of my title, and I got integrated with some native speaking adults. To ensure I was prepared for this new title as ABE teacher, as opposed to ESL. At that time, it was expanded reading and vocabulary. I know Susan remembers back to those days. To be sure I was prepared, they asked me to do the STAR training. And since I'd had a lot of education courses because I came out of K-12 prep, I only taught very briefly in K-12. The content wasn't brand new, but it actually became the start of what's now my life's journey. I am back in a doctoral program at NC State because as an instructor, I found that there was a dearth. There was absolutely no evidence-based interventions or curricula that I could find. There weren't even a whole lot of reading materials when I worked with my very lowest level literacy students. And so we do have a lot of ESL materials. And so I was really spoiled with, wow, things can be like this. You can have whole series that guide you. And then I was in ABE and it was like, that isn't really appropriate. And that's not appropriate. And that's not appropriate. And so after a while, I decided maybe I had to go create what was appropriate, or at least go research and share with everyone what was out there. So we're going to start with a little simulation, and then we're going to go into just a little bit of research, and then I'll tell you about my study. I do love that this is called the Best of COABE, which is a little presumptuous in my case because I haven't yet presented at COABE. I will in April. in Indianapolis, but I love manifesting that this is going to be one of the best. And of course, if you're going to COABE, and I hope that you are, come because you'll get not today's presentation, but you'll get a whole lot more data from where we're at. But I will give you some data today as well. I am from the North, and so I speak very quickly. That's good because, like you, I'm trying to fit 75 minutes into every hour. But please don't hesitate to tell me either verbally, because we're not a big group, or put in the chat, slow down or ask questions or go back to. I have a question that just came to me. That is perfectly fine. I've been a teacher forever. I would much rather interactive than not interactive. So feel free to interrupt me. Let's look at the poll. And I love that only 25% of us have never heard of STAR. STAR was a National Professional Development Initiative. I guess it still is, but it's not really currently funded. I don't know, Lee, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know that it's being offered at the moment at
Yeah,
all.
unfortunately, some trainings connected with Octay, they're no longer being funded, and STAR is a part of that. The North Carolina group, we actually attended the training, and midway through the training, it was shut down due to funding cuts.
It was an excellent training theoretically. It gave you this model of these four components of reading. We're going to go a little bit further than that model right now, but before we do that, let's do a little simulation. And so if you are not on mute, go ahead on mute because I want you to sound out. Please don't write, but sound out this word. So we're sort of visiting the world of some of our most struggling adult readers, children's readers for that matter as well. Did sounding out each letter, did you have any problems with that?
I know I did.
It's often hard to know what sound to put with a particular letter if you can't see it within groups. And the reality is that strong readers do typically decode by not by individual letters, but instead by morphemes or groups of letters. So let's try this instead. Again, it's good to verbalize it. It'll really give you that sense of what your lowest level literacy students are dealing with. Now, how many people, just hand raised virtually or with your real hand, how many people think they know the word at this point? It's still kind of hard because of the speed of how fast we went. We went very slow. Now, anybody want to take a guess at the word?
You can type in the chat, I guess, if you
Yeah,
wanna guess. Yeah, if Amy's allowing that.
go for it. Yeah, at this point, you can type in the word, and what you'll come up with is calisthenics. Now, I suspect that we have a population that has a very large vocabulary and is very high level of automaticity. So you likely have this word stored in your full memory. And when you look at it, you didn't sound it out. If it was an unfamiliar word, you probably would have started by looking at the cal, is, and that might trigger that word, that full word recognition. So when we tell students to just sound it out, we need to have some sensitivity to it's not possible to sound it out in individual letters. You've got to go into morphemes. You've got to try to decode it. And so for a long time, people have argued about whether or not we should be teaching phonics skills or sight words. I can tell this whole group is much younger than me. And so you don't remember the 1970s when we went into whole language and nobody taught us any phonics. The truth that we know now is that both are very important pathways to understanding the written word. Strong readers recognize words automatically, either as whole words or as morphemes or word parts, and or the words are decoded. Both systems lead to understanding a word and happen simultaneously and equally quickly, and in fractions of a second. Orthography, that one side of the triangle that we're looking at, is where we represent automaticity. It's what we see on the page. It's when the letters are put together, we may read the word in full, we may read part of the word as morphemes and then recognize the word in full, but it requires prior knowledge of the word, intact sequential memory, and intact self-monitoring. So if it was a nonsense word and you had started with the callus and it had a different ending and you didn't know it, you would have continued decoding and then gotten nowhere. Phonology, which is that other side, is when we have to decode the whole word, when we have to blend the sound, discriminate the sounds. And again, we need intact sequential memory and self-monitoring. Both paths lead to semantics, or the understanding the actual word. Both must actually happen in fractions of a second to move from word reading to text reading. So if you've got to slowly sound out every single word, your short-term memory is full with just sounding out those words, and you're not going to understand the sentence. So fluency instruction is how a learner gets a depth from in this whole process. This particular model comes to us from cognitive science, and it's called the dual root cascade model. And it's a little bit more current, but not quite as well known as the simple view of reading, which I expect most of you already know. This comes from 1986 from Gao and Tumner's research. They posited that learners move from phonemic awareness to decoding through fluency and vocabulary to linguistic comprehension. This means they have to first be aware of the sounds or the phonemic awareness, and then they connect those sounds to the letters and combine those letters. We sometimes call that sounding out, but we're going to actually call it decoding today because we want to emphasize that reading is a code, and we are trying to teach our students how to decode this code. Once the word is decoded, the brain checks for familiarity to what degree the word is known. That's the vocabulary part. Do we know this word in our listening and speaking comprehension? And then to comprehend what we read, we have to be able to do all of that fast enough to hold it in working memory. That's the fluency part. So cognitive science and neuroscience and physiological psychology continue to deepen our understanding of how this all happens in the brain. But everyone really does agree that this is happening in the brain. That you can actually, there's a lot of good physiological science now where they can see these pathways in cognitive development. So essentially, in order to derive meaning from text, a reader needs to have both the ability to decode words accurately and efficiently, and the ability to understand the meaning of those words and phrases, which is the fluency part. So many researchers have identified reading fluency, or the ability to read text accurately, quickly, and with proper expression or prosody, as critical skills for comprehension. It bridges those main components of the Gao and Tumner's theory. And like any skill, it requires repeated practice. Now, we are speaking here of foundational literacy. We're not actually even going to get into comprehension today. So if you're thinking, well, there's background knowledge and there's all these other things that, yes, need to be considered for comprehension. But before you can even get to the importance of background knowledge or contextualization or all the things we teach in ABE 2 and 3, and often even in 1 and in our combined classes, we've got to make sure these foundational skills are in place, because as long as the foundational skills are lacking, reading comprehension will not improve. And so I'm going to finish my research part by pointing out that this study focuses on this bridging skill of reading fluency. And I also want to introduce that there's significant research, Greenberg et al. In 1997, Wynn et al. In 2006, that underscore the fact that weak foundational skills, particularly reading fluency, challenge a large portion of our struggling adult readers. In fact, Greenberg et al., Daphne Greenberg is out of Georgia, and she does all of her research with the community college system in Atlanta and surrounding counties. It's probably not limited to Atlanta. But this is our population. Our population, when we're talking about ABE 1 and 2 and even 3, and sometimes even 4, are missing these foundational skills of fluency. We know vocabulary. And from what I've seen in my years teaching, we do a good job building on vocabulary, building on vocabulary. But we also assume the more you read, the more you're building vocabulary. But if you're missing that fluency component, you actually don't have any cognitive wherewithal to be able to build new vocabulary from your reading. You're too focused on just trying to get through the sentence. So back to my study. So my study is on the HELPS reading fluency intervention with adult students. I'm a ways out from my dissertation. I'm only in my second year, but my IRB approval at NC State is good till 2100. So I expect to develop and grow into many different iterations of this study. It's initially a qualitative case study. And one of the reasons I'm here today is because Title II providers are the best people to collectively identify the needs. And so I'm grateful to be here, and I'm going to be asking for your feedback. And I want you to know that while people I've already met with have influenced this, that you will be the next iteration, that your feedback is what we need. So the aim of this particular study is to advance the knowledge regarding effective evidence-based text fluency interventions for low literacy adults by pairing trained undergraduate tutors with adult literacy learners for online tutoring using the HELPS program. So I'm going to tell you about the study today. There's still a few spots in the study. If you're like, oh, I wish I know someone that could benefit. But I also want you to get a sense of the big picture and tell me, yeah, this would be better if. The research questions that I'm asking is the impact of this particular intervention helps with adult learners, how it's perceived by the adult learner, how the tutoring relationship is perceived by the college student working with the adult learner, and the adult learner working with the college student, and then the specific needs for vocabulary support during the intervention. So this last goal is particularly important for our second language learners, but it may also be needed by our native speakers, because part of the research that I'm already uncovering is showing how low the vocabulary is with our native English speakers who are at these levels. I'll tell you all about the curriculum, but I will say at this point that the curriculum gets progressively more difficult. So I'm expecting we'll start seeing as they get to the higher expository passages of the curriculum that our native speakers will need vocabulary support. The intervention itself's been used for over a decade successfully with children and adolescents, but it was never explored with adults until I learned about it and tried it with some of my students while I was teaching. They were all multilinguals at the time, by the way. I did have permission from the author, Dr. John Begany at NC State. He is now my advisor as I seek to study and perhaps adapt this intervention. It does not have a vocabulary component, for instance. And so I saw I needed that with my multilinguals. So that's part of the study. But all of these questions are really equally important to me. I'm curious, which one is the most important to you? And so Lee's going to put up another poll. And Lee, you're capturing the results of the polls for me to get later.
I am.
Awesome.
Yeah. And right now we got 75% participated, so we're getting close to 100. Looks like majority one, question one, a lot are saying is most important to support their work.
And
And
I
then question
suspect
four
four
is
is
following up.
getting a lot of attention from people who have multilinguals
Yeah.
in their group. But I will point out later what I'm finding with the native speakers and their vocabulary ability that we probably would never notice just chatting with them.
Hmm.
So I'm going
Hmm.
to go ahead and end the poll. This is great. I think it was already done. That's awesome.
Yep.
Thank you. Like I said, your feedback is so helpful to me. So let me tell you about this intervention. Helping Early Literacy with Practice Strategies, which is commonly known as HELPS, is a 13-step tutoring intervention for reading fluency. It's been implemented locally and globally. It actually exists in 3 languages at this point, but only with children and adolescents until this study. When I used the intervention with my adult students, their speed and their accuracy improved, which both impacted their comprehension. But perhaps even more exciting, it increased their confidence. And this psychological impact is particularly critical for adult learners who often carry a lifetime of reading failure. And so watching that we're already seeing it in the early parts, and I'll point it out with some of the students that are currently in it. Essentially, at each session, learners work on one of 100 increasingly difficult passages in the curriculum. They start with a 1-minute timed reading to determine if they're ready to move on to a new passage in that session or continue to work on the passage from the prior session. So it moves at the pace of the adult learner. This flowchart and scripted directions make it very easy to ensure high fidelity from the tutors. Together, the flowchart and the script make tutoring very easy. By the way, it also makes it easy to train tutors. It takes about 3 hours to train a tutor in the intervention and a little bit of coaching. And we see high fidelity is maintained. I say that because in future iterations, I am interested in using community-based tutors. If you've got a tutoring program, but you're never quite sure how to guide your tutors or how to give them evidence-based strategies, this might be a good fit for your school. But I digress on what we're here today to talk about. So back to this intervention study. As comfort with the process grows, by the way, the script gets abbreviated but never fully abandoned. Ensuring every step is preceded by clear instruction and followed with lots of general and specific praise is critical. The key elements are repeated reading. The learner focuses on one passage in each session. Session's about 20 to 30 minutes. Movement through the 100 passage curriculum is based on their ability to exceed their goal at their timed retention read at the start of each session. It's why there's 2 sides to that flow chart. If they meet their goal and they move on to a new passage, the tutor knows to go down the right side. If they don't, they go down the left side of that flow chart. Students can continue to work on a passage up to 3 sessions, although that is unlikely after the first passage or 2. If that is happening regularly, we typically lower the goal because we want success. Tutors model the passage, they read it aloud, and they stop for the learner to give them the next word. So there's silent reading within the passage and modeled fluency. There's a phrase drill practice that allows learners to actually work on natural sentence chunks to contribute to that prosody. You know, we don't read like a robot, we put together natural sentence chunks. And so the tutor gives them sentence chunks to read repeatedly. There are lots of time readings, at least 3 in every session. Then the words read correctly and the errors are graphed for all retention reads, COABE reads, and final reads, so that each session the tutor and learner can review, can analyze the progress, and can celebrate their growth or their effort at each session. Adult learners are particularly interested in this type of specific database feedback. While it isn't even offered or encouraged, after a few sessions, we're finding that adult learners sometimes ask for the passages so they can work on it between the sessions. This sort of focused motivation is priceless to their success. And since the data tends to be the most exciting thing for all of us, including the adult learners, let's take a look at this. So I'll ask you to put in the chat, what do you think WCPM stands for? At least since I can't see the chat, the first person to put it correctly, just read them and credit them.
I'll let you know. Word count per minute from Jennifer Justice.
All right, very close. And so it's words correct per minute. An adult learner can follow their words read correctly as plotted on this top part of the graph. And their green line is their goal. And so you can see in this particular graph that this particular learner started with a goal of 120 words correct per minute, and then it was increased to 135 words correct per minute after a couple of sessions. They can also see the words incorrect on the bottom in the red part. Each passage has its own little graph. So this learner started with a COABE read of 125 words correct per minute in their COABE read, and they progressed to 161 words correct per minute at the end of the session. Now, that's not too exciting when you realize, as we went through all of those strategies, they just spent the last 20 minutes going through the interventions phrase drill, the reading silently, the repeatedly reading that passage. They get very excited, but as educators, we know, well, yeah, if you do that, they will get faster. What's more important to us is looking at over time. We like to see that they retain that improvement from one session to the next. So if you look at this particular passage for this student, by the way, this is a real graph. They started reading at 125 words correct per minute. That was their COABE read. They finished their session with 143 words correct per minute. And when they came back the next session, usually a couple of days later, they were still reading, they still were showing improvement. They were reading at 137 words correct per minute. That was above their goals still, so they were able to progress to the next passage. And so watching that and helping them keep that improvement even when they come back. And for some of them, you know, we know with adults that there could be a week between these sessions, not supposed to be that way, but that they can retain that when it might even be like a COABE read again. This graph was compressed, by the way. It is more easily read in what we call our virtual folder. And the students are looking at the virtual folder. There's also a progress charting form where this data is put for every session along with notes about the session. And by the way, the progress tracking form creates this graph so the tutor doesn't need to be graphing during the session anymore. Everything is automated for them. So they just put the numbers in and then they can sit with the student and look at the graph at the end of their session. Any questions on, that's kind of the whole process of this intervention.
And feel free to type in the chat, or you can also raise your hand virtually if you would like to unmute yourself to ask questions to Amy. But so far, I'm not seeing any in the chat, Amy. But
okay, well, remember, you can always tell me to come back.
Exactly.
And by the way, if you're watching this in the archives, email me. My email will be at the end, and I'm happy to answer any questions. That's true if you're here as well. So let's get to this particular study. To participate, an adult learner must be enrolled in ABE. They have to speak English well enough to be tutored in English, but they don't have to be a native English speaker. They have to have internet and computer access because it is online. Or the school can provide that for them if they want, if they do it during school time or on school property. They have to be willing to allow the ABE program to share the TABE or the CASA scores. They will take some additional short tests that I administer, and they have to be willing, most importantly, to participate in 3 30-minute tutoring sessions weekly for as long as they need, but we're asking them to kind of think about the commitment being at least 8 weeks at this point, which is 20 to 50 sessions. I am committed personally to finding volunteers for people who can continue to benefit after the study is over. So we don't want to drop anyone. If they're showing progress, they're still within the need area. Adult learners are tutored by fully trained undergraduates who are repeatedly coached to ensure continued high fidelity to the intervention protocol. By the way, the adult learners are also paid $5 a session up to a cap of $200. While the fall saw only one participant, we currently have 8 of 10 spots filled. That includes 5 native speakers and 3 multilinguals. While the focus is on students who score 3rd to 5th grade in their reading fluency, not comprehension, but in reading fluency specifically, we have accepted lower level students. In fact, the only students so far that have been excluded, they were excluded because they tested above 5th grade reading fluency. In other words, this intervention would not have been a great use of their time. If we believe, based on the selection criteria, that the intervention is a good use of their time, then they also undergo a battery of assessments that looks at phonemic awareness. I can show you the tests while I say it, decoding skills, vocabulary, and word reading ability. Scores so far, and I'll give you a little more detail about this later, they've ranged from below average to extremely low, with most showing extremely low performance across all 5 subtests of the Wechsler and the vocabulary subtest of the Woodcock-Johnson. In some cases, they're even performing at preschool or kindergarten levels. And remember, we're not talking about language issues here. 5 of the 8 are native speakers. Any questions about assessments? Sometimes educators get really excited about this stuff. And while I cannot offer this across the board, I have, at least for one of the 2 people that have been excluded, offered to do this assessment protocol if they thought it would be useful to them and their teacher. Because we know educators often don't have time to work one-on-one with the students to get, it was one of the biggest problems with the STAR training. In order to do the STAR training effectively, it was about a 20-minute one-on-one assessment. And so I don't want to open the floodgates for that, but if they are sort of appropriate, remember, I'm a teacher. I want to do whatever I can to help.
So far, no questions, Amy, but
Awesome.
I will let you know.
Must mean I'm just being so comprehensive that I've thought them all out.
Exactly.
So you guys are on the front line. For months, I met with leaders from the community colleges around the state to promote the study. And while everyone was wonderful and excited, I did make a lot of progress on recruitment. As I said, I only had 1 student in the fall. I did learn a lot, though, and I did continually adjust my IRB and the study requirements based on what I was learning. So I started with ABE levels 1 and 2 only in my recruitment population. But after meeting with community college directors and educators and even a president, I learned that different community colleges use those titles a little differently, and that many community colleges have multi-level classes and the students within them aren't even quite sure of which level they're in. So we expanded to be levels 3 and 4 as well. I had to adjust my IRB when I received funding. Although none of my current participants seem to be motivated by the funding, that change did seem to get the information circulated. So I'm guessing that administrators thought that was a really good thing. And so suddenly teachers were made aware of this, and I started getting calls, and I was able to enroll the rest of the students. So getting feedback from these community college leaders has been critical. It's my intent to meet the needs that exist, but my personal experience is with Wake Tech predominantly and a little bit of Durham Tech. And the reality is, I know they're not always representative of all the community colleges in North Carolina. So I'm going to ask you to go into breakouts, and Lee is actually going to share these questions, and she's going to share it in a document where notes can be taken, which is yay. And if you are watching this on archive, you can email me your responses, but I want to try to collect everyone's feedback on whether or not this inclusion criteria is useful. Do you think that you have students within the inclusion criteria that could benefit even if you're not sure they're willing. But, is this criteria targeting at a population that you have experience with at your community college? And if not, is there a problem with the criteria? What do we need to change to meet your students' needs for those low-level foundational students who are not doing well on comprehension, likely because they're missing foundational skills? What do you consider to be your greatest academic literacy challenge in ABE? So perhaps it isn't foundational skills, it's something else entirely. What advice or requests do you have for me? Give it to me. I want it all. What outstanding questions do you have about study? And so we will try to give as much time as we can for feedback, but we'll never have enough time for that. So please go ahead and somebody take notes for your group. So I want to be quiet, and I would love if somebody would tell me, what did y'all talk about in your group?
I'll volunteer.
Thanks.
Yay!
Okay, great. I took notes. I was in group number 4, and about the inclusion criteria. We agreed that we definitely have students that could benefit from tutoring and reading fluency. ABE students speak English well enough to be tutored, etc. The biggest concerns would be the time commitment required from them. Well, actually, the time span, because often students are sort of in and out, and 8 weeks. I think it says it spans at least 8 weeks. That can sometimes be a bit of a challenge. But so the short time in the program, and then we talked a little bit about the fact that we still have issues with ensuring that all of our students have laptops that they can use at home. Partly because no matter how many we buy, we issue them, we check them out to students, and we found this ever since COVID, they don't necessarily come back. So at any given time, we have millions of them checked out, but we don't have more, so there's always going to be that. Somebody in our group Sandra Williams brought up the idea of, I'm sure you have considered all kinds of things, but have you considered the idea of doing this over the phone?
You can't read over the phone. You can't see the passage that you're reading from.
Got it.
So we won't even let them use their phones for, even on FaceTime, because reading on a phone is significantly different. Honestly, we can do this in person. This was designed for in person, and COVID, taught us so much, and it became an online thing during COVID. And for adults, it makes so much more sense to do this virtually, because it's, 30 minutes here and 30 minutes there. Catherine, thank you for bringing up something I don't mention, but would be useful to y'all, is the scheduling of this is done specifically between the tutor and the adult learner. So there's lots of flexibility, and the adult learner, the tutor knows they can't change the schedule by their needs, but they need to be as flexible as possible to the adult learner. So it isn't uncommon for the adult learner to say, "Oh, I can't do it Tuesday night at 5:30. Can we do it Wednesday night at 5:30?"
Oh, that's great.
So there is, we even have some that are doing it on the weekends. Like, I stay out of it, but I know them all. And so I keep my mouth closed. But yeah, some of our tutors were like, "Sure, we can do it Saturday at 1 o'clock." And so, all right, if they're willing, like, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. And then really fast, two more questions, because we didn't get to the very final one really. But the biggest challenge we see with our ABE students is with higher level vocabulary. Obviously, that's something we could probably all agree on. And then in terms of advice or requests for you, I personally am very interested in this whole concept of being able to train people, perhaps internally here, to be the tutors. Because if we had a protocol like that, we could turn around and provide this for our students. I think this would be I'm already thinking we could do a workshop internally for our instructors and sort of talk as a department about what we could do for that.
Email
This
me,
is the
please.
discussion Amy and I were just having before the webinar. So Catherine, great minds think alike.
Great. Okay, so I will definitely email you, Amy. Thank you.
Yes, please. Would anybody else like to share? And again, if you're not comfortable sharing, then go ahead and put it in that Google Doc, because I'm super excited about that. Even the higher vocabulary, there's another intervention that I have found, It is not yet published. It's still under research out of another university called El Rabe. And I don't know if I got two of the pieces of it, but it's about morphology and building higher level vocabulary from the morphology. And I'm very interested in it because, as an ESL teacher for many years, I'm all about vocabulary. And so I'm definitely looking at that for future study. They also developed for K-12, and I reached out to the designer and said, what about adults? And she said, no, but we would love to have you do research with adults. So yes, keep telling me what your needs are in literacy, in reading, and I will do my best to try to find and identify and do professional developments. And there's a lot more out there than I knew was out there when I was a student. So I'm still sharing, aren't I, Lee?
You are, and for the sake of time,
Yeah.
let's wrap up. But I just had a thought. Let me make a copy of all these questions, a clean copy. I'll put it in the chat. And if you want to send, right, your answers to these questions directly to Amy, feel free to do that, because it sounds like she wants to gather as much information as possible for this study. So I'm going to work on that right now.
Awesome. Thank you. So I want to give you a little bit of a taste of the preliminary findings. I found that recruiting adult learners is far harder than I expected. I started over the summer and I thought I'm going to be overwhelmed with people, and I was not. But I was overwhelmed with tutors. The undergraduates are super excited for this opportunity to work. And even though at this point I've gone from 1 learner to 8 learners of potentially 10 to 12 we could serve this semester, only 3 community colleges are represented in that number. I started out by doing presentations to community college classes. I'm still happy to do that. So I can do a 7-minute presentation to a class if the class is appropriate. I do it online just to save cost of traveling around the state. And we're also recruiting outside of the state. So you really don't have any funding for that. But I can also do a presentation for your staff meeting if you want your teachers to hear about it first. The truth is my IRB says I need to hear from the student directly, but we're going to give you a flyer. And I can tell you most of my students were elbowed by their teacher. I knew that already, but I had to write the IRB in a way that was acceptable to them and in the way that community colleges didn't all have to get IRB approval as well. So we want to keep the community college itself as unengaged as possible. We want to make it as easy as possible for you as well, because we know you've got a lot on your plate. It is possible in future semesters that I could have an entire undergraduate class working with me on this project, but I've got to be able to prove to my advisor that I have the adult learners there to keep all of my undergrads busy. So while I have a small qualitative study right now, it could be bigger if I had commitments from community colleges, and it could be part of coursework. So this current study is not. It needs to be in addition to the classes they're taking, but there's nothing to say that we couldn't do it embedded into your program. I can tell you that the fall tutor learner pairing is going incredibly strong. They've already completed actually 23 sessions as of last night. The other learners have just started. We have 6 that just started and 1 that I just enrolled yesterday. So on the numbers I'm about to give you in a second, I'm only looking at 7 learners, not 8. I wanted to kind of see if I could show you something about this fall learner and what they're doing. And so while we don't use this to evaluate the intervention itself, I looked at the first 4 readings, COABE readings they did in September when they started. And the words correct per minute at that time, the average of it was 125 words correct per minute. This is a native speaker, by the way. And the average of her 4 December COABE readings was 142. So she's getting faster. But more importantly, when I talked to her in December, because I was getting ready to pay her and I needed to set that up, she recently asked me to come to watch a session so I could see how well she was doing. And she shared with me that she had asked for the passage, that once they had done the co-read, we were happy to share the passage if they want. She'd asked for the passage, and she was now having her adult daughter time her in between the sessions so that she would come back strong. All of that's really a testament to her motivation. And we know when there's motivation, there's success. Her self-efficacy has increased. She told me that now she happily reads in class, and she used to avoid it like the plague. So the other 6 learners, like I said, started last week. I don't have a lot about them at this point, and one just yesterday. But I have assessed all but that last learner. And I can tell you that what I found has been shocking. Again, we're looking at predominantly native speakers, only 2 multilingual learners, with their receptive vocabulary. That's the words they understand when they hear it. 2 scored low average, 3 scored very low, and 2 scored extremely low. With expressive vocabulary, that's the word you use when you speak, 1 scored low average, 3 scored very low, and 3 scored extremely low. Extremely low is usually like a kindergarten preschool level. So there's at least 1 native speaker in there. Mind you, these are simple counts. They are not statistical tests. They won't be used pre and post. They're just being collected for descriptive purposes. And because I'm an educator, to help the tutors address the needs most effectively in their sessions. But it gives you a sense of what our learners are starting to look like, at least the ones motivated enough to come for testing. It's a very self-selected group. But they are by far the lowest level learners I've got in terms of fluency. 3 that I started at first grade reading fluency goals. The highest we started anyone was 3rd grade reading fluency goal. This is what the flyer looks like. Lee's going to share it with you. You can share it with students and colleagues. It pretty much says everything I've said today, or at least says the key parts of the study that I've said today. I'm also, like I said, happy to share the 10-minute recruitment presentation, answer questions, meet with informational presentations with educators. You just need to reach out. Even once I've filled the study, I'm still happy to do that because there's always the next study and building this pathway between this bridge between the community colleges and the university. Like all adult learners that are interested and have seen the flyer, you now have my personal cell phone number and my school email. Please feel free to use it. Like I said, it's my personal number. So when they call me on Sunday afternoons, I do answer. And I now do answer my cell number when I don't know the number very politely, because I often find it's a student or someone calling about the study. So everybody gets a very polite answer. And if they're second language learners, we know how much they love being on the phone. And so you can assure them I'm an ESL teacher by heart. And so as soon as I hear that accent, my speaking slows down, my vocabulary reduces, and I have to say, and tell me who you are, and tell me why you're calling me. And we get this information out of them. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom in the breakout groups with me. I promise I'm going to carry it with me in this study and in future studies as they evolve and they develop. So don't hesitate to reach out. And like every researcher, I have to then show you all of the research that I pulled from. And soon I'll have a slide with all the people that I'm thanking for helping me. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Lee and just say thanks again.